What's up guys, welcome back to the Kommander MTG YouTube channel. I'm your host Jason Komm, and today we have another Kommander Spotlight. This video is dedicated to one of my absolute favorite commanders of all time, Tuvasa the Sunlit. This is my Enchantron deck, where the goal is to suit Tuvasa up with auras and use other enchantments to pump her up big enough to commander damage our opponents out of the game. Tuvasa has two abilities. First, she gets +1/+1 for each enchantment we control, and whenever we cast our first enchantment spell each turn, we draw a card. The beauty of this deck is Tuvasa can go in two directions at any given point depending on the state of the game. On one hand, Tuvasa's first ability wants us to play a ton of enchantments, making her a huge threat, and her second ability gives us reliability and value for just playing an enchantment every turn. All the cards in this video are in the deck list in the description below, so be sure to check that out, and I promise you won't regret it. Now here's the game plan for this deck. Spend the early game getting our draw engines online and Tuvasa in play. Then depending on our board state, we start suiting up either Tuvasa or another creature with our auras. And lastly, we give these creatures unblockable and swing in for the win. Now let's take a closer look at some of my favorite cards in this deck and some of their interactions. First up is Sithis Harvest Hand. This 2-mana enchantment creature has, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and draw a card. This is the perfect card for our early game plan and effectively turns all our enchantments into cantrips. There are a lot of creatures with this enchantress ability, such as Mesa Enchantress, Satyr Enchanter, and Citizen Champion. All three of those are in this deck, and Sithis in particular is amazing because she's only 2 mana, draws us a card on cast, and we gain 1 life. The life gain is actually a very important factor of this card. Since we are playing mostly a Voltron style deck, we are very susceptible to crackbacks from our opponents, and one way to make sure we stay safe is simply to pad our life total. With 34 enchantment/enchantment creatures in this deck, we should be able to trigger Sithis' ability at least once a turn. This will keep our hands full and find us those crucial unblockable spells we'll need to finish off our opponents. Another great creature to get out in the early game is Sanctum Weaver. This 2-mana enchantment creature has the activated ability to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments you control. This card synergizes pretty well with Sithis and Tuvasa. Often in a deck like this with the relatively low average mana value, you can play multiple spells a turn, but often you run out of mana way too soon. And that's where Sanctum Weaver kind of comes in and scales with us each turn and truly becomes a massive threat. It's not uncommon for us to have 5 or even 10 plus enchantments in play at a time, and Sanctum Weaver will effectively double our mana production every turn and allow us to play all the enchantments we draw from those enchantress effects. Once we've established our card draw and ramp engines, we can begin to move into the mid game, and this is where you want to make a choice to go full on Enchantron or the value engine path. This will be dictated by your board state and auras you've been able to draw in hand. Let's say you haven't been able to draw into many of your auras, but instead have great supplemental enchantments. Cards like Archon of Sun's Grace and Sigil of the Empty Throne are the perfect ways to buy time while also advancing your board state and opening up other avenues for the victory. Archon of Sun's Grace is a 3/4 flyer with lifelink that gives all Pegasus creatures we control lifelink, and on top of that it has the Constellation ability, where whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under our control, we create a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying. Imagine we have Tuvasa, Sithis, and Archon in play going into turn 5, and we cast a Wild Growth for 1 mana. Since it is the first enchantment we cast this turn, Tuvasa will trigger, getting +1/+1, and we'll draw a card. Sithis will also trigger, drawing us another card and gaining 1 life. And finally, Archon will trigger, giving us a 2/2 Pegasus with flying and lifelink. For 1 mana, we just gave Tuvasa +1/+1, we drew 2 cards, we gained 1 life, and we created a 2/2 Pegasus with flying and lifelink, while also ramping us into future plays. This is the power of this deck on full display. Triggers happening all over the place, drawing tons of cards and snowballing out of control. As we all know, dream scenarios like this don't happen every game, and we often need to go on the defensive. Cards like Sphere of Safety, Propaganda, and Ghostly Prison will disincentivize our opponents from attacking us, giving us more time to find our finishers. Sphere of Safety has creatures can't attack you or planeswalker you control unless their controller pays X for each of those creatures, where X is the number of enchantments you control. Every time I play this, at least one person at the table picks it up, reads it super close, then starts counting all the enchantments I have in play. Often it's 5+, and you can visibly see the frustration in their eyes. It is so funny. This type of protection scales with us, making it nearly impossible to attack us in the late game, but it also triggers all the Enchantress and Constellation abilities we've already discussed. If you have the ability to play one of these protection spells in the mid game, just do it. We're not trying to block with our creatures, and we need to be able to swing out comfortably to win. Lastly, as we start preparing for the endgame, we need to be aware of what our opponents are doing and keep them from getting to their endgame faster than us. In this deck, we are rocking some brutal enchantment removal to keep our opponents in check. Cards like Imprisoned in the Moon, Darksteel Mutation, and Kenris Transformation are such annoying cards to deal with, but can absolutely lock down our opponents. One of my favorite ways to utilize these cards is to target my opponent's commanders, because we don't destroy or exile them, they can't put them back in the command zone. And without the proper removal on their end, they could lose their commander the entire game. Not to mention all these cards trigger our Enchantress and Constellation effects again, which makes these cards problematic for our opponents and synergistic with our board state. These cards even count toward Tuvasa's first ability, setting us up to go into our endgame. And now that we've set up our value engines, protection, and board control, we can start to head into that late game. The first thing we want to do is start packing auras onto Tuvasa or another threat like Bruna. Great cards here are the Umbras like Eel Umbra, Hyena Umbra, Snake Umbra, and Octopus Umbra. All these count toward Tuvasa's power total, but also provide some additional utility on top of giving her totem armor. This will help protect her from getting destroyed and getting 5-for-1 by our opponents. Next is to blow Tuvasa's power through the roof with cards like All That Glitters, Ethereal Armor, and Ancestral Mask. These cards effectively double Tuvasa's first ability or more, and often gives us the ability to one-hit KO someone with commander damage. Imagine we have Tuvasa enchanted with Hyena Umbra, Sithis, Wild Growth, Sigil of the Empty Throne, Propaganda, and Darksteel Mutation in play. Tuvasa is already an 8/8 thanks to our early and mid-game plays, and we play out Ancestral Mask. Now Tuvasa is a 21/21, and that's where we play our finishers. Whitewater Naiads and Archetype of Imagination are two absolutely brutal cards in this deck. Whitewater Naiads is an enchantment creature, meaning it contributes to Tuvasa's and Ancestral Mask abilities, making Tuvasa a 24/24 now, but it also gives Tuvasa unblockable. Making our creatures unblockable is the last piece of the puzzle and allows us to finish games. Archetype of Imagination has a similar effect, giving all our creatures flying, while our opponent's creatures lose flying. Unless our opponents are playing a ton of reach, then we should be alright. This is the most common end game for this deck. Suit Tuvasa up with enchantments and swing for 21 unblockable commander damage. However, it is not the only way to win with this deck. After playing this deck a couple of times with your group, they'll start to catch on that this deck is extremely deadly and can kill someone from out of nowhere. Knowing that your opponents will often try to take Tuvasa out as soon as she hits the battlefield, we can effectively deploy the same strategy but on any other creatures that we have. This is why I include cards like Bruna, Light of Alabaster, Nelea's Colossus, and Hydra Omnivore. I've won games by suiting up one of my 4/4 Angels from Sigil with a bunch of auras while Nelea's Colossus was in play. It was something like Hyena Umbra, Steal the Godhead, and Ethereal Armor. Anyway, the Angel was like a 50/50 unblockable, swinging in out of nowhere, and my opponent couldn't do anything because they just spent all their resources getting rid of my Tuvasa. There are so many fun ways for this deck to edge out a win, and that's why it's one of my absolute favorite decks to play. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to check out the deck list in the description below if you liked my Tuvasa Enchantron video. Also, I absolutely love interacting with people on my channel, so feel free to drop a comment with some fun cards you would play in this deck. And if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Commander content. And please check out my other Commander Spotlight videos for some deck building inspiration if you need it. I'm Jason Komm from Commander MTG, and I'll see you in the next one.